This is Financially Fit Business with Ruth King.
Welcome to the Financially Fit Business Podcast. Here you discover ideas, tactics, news, and information that matters to the health of your business or your clients' businesses. I'm your host, Ruth King. Here's how we will help you increase the financial fitness of your business today. Subtle changes in P&L and balance sheet trends mean a lot. It's best to pay attention to these small changes and resolve them before they become major cash flow, productivity, or profitability problems. In the last episodes, I covered little changes in the overall profit and loss trends, changes in gross margin, and changes in productivity. I covered little changes in the balance sheet current ratio, asset test, accounts receivable to accounts payable, debt to equity, and usage ratios. In this episode, I covered the final balance sheet ratio, working capital. Let's get started. Working capital is actually my favorite trend. It's my favorite ratio and graph trends to look at because this one graph really and truly gives a picture of the health of a company, almost instantaneously. It's really interesting to look at from a standpoint of, all right, current assets minus current liabilities. And you're looking at a situation where it's different than the current ratio, which is current assets divided by current liabilities, simply because it looks at just, do we have enough money to operate? I mean, current ratio basically does the same thing, but working capital sometimes can be a little elusive. So, for example, for companies that get huge deposits and big deposits for work that they're going to be doing in the future, i.e., it becomes a balance sheet item. It's not on the P&L yet. So the current ratio can be going down because profitability might be going down, but the working capital will continue to go up based on them continuing to get deposits for work that's going to be done in the future. So the two ratios don't have to be exactly, alike. Most of the times they are. But for large manufacturing companies or for companies that are building stuff, I don't know any other way to describe it, they generally will take deposits and, we'll take a deposit on, signing the contract. We'll take a deposit when we're this amount finished. We take a deposit before we ship it. And, the final bill is due 30 days after. Well, all of those things are generally work in process and backlog. So they don't hit the P&L. And so the two ratios have a tendency to be very different. The working capital trend lines can be going up because of increasing deposits and increasing backlog, and profitability can be going down. So be very careful with these two ratios to figure out if that particular thing is happening, that the company, even though it's, not been able to recognize everything on their P&L, depending upon the type of accounting that they use. The reality of it is those two ratios can be very different. As a general rule, for companies that are not manufacturing or not, building things, the two ratios have a tendency to follow each other, but they don't have to. So let's talk about working capital from a monthly perspective. And we'll also talk about working capital from a trailing perspective. So let's take the monthly perspective. Monthly working capital, again, I see a lot of times as a seesaw, and it's going up, it's going down, it's going up, it's going down, it's going up, it's going down, depending upon how much cash is coming in, how much work is COD type work, how many bills have come in, and have they paid their bills, and all the other fun things that go along with it. It's a normal cycle. It's not unusual for it to look like a soft tooth or an EEG, diagram or something along those lines. The thing that becomes very, very critical in the working capital ratios is actually the long-term one, to make sure it's trending in the right way. The thing that I would warn you about is this ratio going down to zero or even negative. Hopefully it's not heading that way, but I've seen situations where the working capital was doing really, really, really well, and the owner had an event where he needed to pull a lot of cash out of the business for a very good reason, and it's not one that I can share here. and the working capital just crashed almost to zero and actually did hit negative a couple of times. And as a result, they had profitable sales, and it was just a question of building back those profitable sales and building it and building it. But for a period of time, they were robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of having to pay payroll and get their bills because they didn't have the cash to be able to cover the seasonality of their particular business. So sometimes things happen in business where you have a situation where you got to take the money out of the business. We had another one, which I can talk about a little bit, where a owner had $800,000 in savings, and everybody was saying, "That's too much. That's too much. That's too much." He ended up getting sued, and eventually prevailed and won. But it took 3 years and 700,000 of that $800,000 in cash. So you never know, and you know what happened to his working capital. Um, but the reality is we never, ever, ever know, what's gonna happen, and keeping cash and making sure that the working capital ratio, uh, heads to the positive perspective, especially from the long-term graph trends, not, up and down, up and down, up and down, but, more up than down, more up than down, more up and down. You can see a slight trend on the monthly, but it's a lot easier to be able to see it on a trailing graph. So after the break, we will talk about trailing working capital. Thanks for listening to the Financially Fit Business Podcast. We'll be right back.
Financial advisory services are the key to the longevity of the accounting profession. If you want to get started providing advisory services or want a review of a finance course you took in college, Ruth King's manual, Understanding Financial Trends Analysis, might be your first step. This manual gives you the information you need to help your clients with their financial statements. A great start or addition to your financial advisory practice. You help them with clarity on their business's financial health, the ability to spot impending issues and resolve them before they become a major crisis, less stress and sleepless nights worrying about the financial part of their business. Your Financial Statement Trends Analysis Manual is the reference guide. What do you want in your financial advisory services practice? Click on the link below for more information and to order.
We're back. Thanks for listening to the Financially Fit Business Podcast. Before the break, we started talking about monthly working capital and what happens when the working capital gets to zero or even gets negative. The trailing has a tendency to be not sawtooth and be in a situation where it should be trending upward or should be fairly stable. Profitable sales and collections, collections, important, on those sales will also show obviously in the P&L graphs, but also show in the trailing working capital graphs as they're going on as the company saves more and more and more money. The interesting part about the trailing graph is I've had clients who actually use trailing to say, okay, I can buy another company. And so they'll watch the trailing graph. It will get to a certain point, and they never let it get to zero. Say, okay, I now have the cash to go buy another company. Boom, it drops. And then they go out and they integrate that company and it becomes profitable and all the other fun things. And the trailing ratio goes up and up and up and up. And again, quicker this time because we have more. And then boom, time to buy another company. So this particular company buys other companies based on the position of their working capital and to make sure that they have enough in savings and everything else like that. When it hits a specific level, they know they can buy another company because they hate debt too. It's a situation where owners may or may not like debt, and they may look at the working capital to be able to, purchase additional company or purchase assets or something along those lines. You can do the same thing with purchasing trucks. The company that I mentioned with the debt to equity ratio who had to buy 5 trucks, they used the cash to be able to buy them. So their working capital ratio went down, and then it continued to go back up as they repaid the loans as the company kept its profitability up. So, you can look at the working capital trend on the long-term basis to decide, okay, we have enough money. Our baseline is X. We never want the working capital to go under X. and we can go buy a company, or, we can go buy assets that we need for the business, et cetera. And we don't have to take out loans to do that. So the thing to do on the trailing basis is to figure out where the company needs to be as a baseline in terms of working capital. And that should be based on the amount of cash that the company needs, in savings or something along those lines. I have a tendency to want owners to have enough cash to be able to fund at least 3 months of payroll and 3 months of overhead expenses. Um, and then look at that and make sure that that amount is cash. Well, that also comes as part of their working capital too. And so that will give you pretty much of a baseline of where the working capital needs to be at all times. And then as it grows, as the company becomes more and more and more profitable, then there are options to do. Again, keep the savings as you can, because you never know when you're going to need it because of some incredibly horrific event that happens. But the thing that also should be looked at is those little changes, especially little changes downward with respect to the trends on a trailing basis. If the working capital decreases, by a little bit, 5% or something like that, why? Is the company less profitable? Is the company, did they have a huge purchase that they had to make? Is it a situation where the company owners bought another company? Is it a situation where they had to fund cash or something like that? These little changes absolutely mean a lot, especially with working capital, because it really shows the health of a company, and making sure the health of the company is going, positively, so to speak. From there, I, again, use trailing working capital more than any other graph of all the ones that we've talked about over the past episodes, because it really and truly talks about the health of a company. And that's what you really and truly need to watch to make sure that the business health remains healthy. All right. So those are the ratios that we talked about. We covered the little changes in P&L trends and making sure that our revenue and our gross profit lines remain parallel. If they're splitting apart, changes in suppliers, changes in productivity, those types of things. Be very, very careful with that. We've talked about changes in gross margins, which we'll also see if those two lines split. What's going on there? Figure it out. Productivity. This is the graph that is the counterintuitive graph. Up is bad, down is good. Why is a productivity graph going up? The company people are becoming less productive. Figure that particular one out too. From the balance sheet side, we've talked about current ratio and asset test, and those two ratios again should be parallel. If they are splitting, there's a buildup of inventory, and as we've talked about, inventory is a bet. Just make sure it's for a reason that you're building up inventory. The accounts receivable to accounts payable ratio, which is the crazy ratio because it has a tendency to also be with respect to the receivable days. It may be a collection problem. It might be just that the company had more sales or had more seasonal sales or something along those lines. The usage ratios, which are our receivable days and our inventory days. Inventory days should not ever go up, with the exception of, purchases that are seasonal or making because things are getting scarce or something along those lines. And usage ratio should always be under 30 days for just about all small businesses. And then I covered the final ratio, which is the balance, which is the working capital ratio, which to me, I saved the best for last. It is pretty much my favorite ratio because it tells a whole lot about what's going on in the business. You should see consistency between the P&L ratios and the balance sheet ratios. If the P&L net operating profit is going down, more than likely your current ratio and asset tests are going to be going down. Your receivables to payables days probably will be going down, and your working capital, unless you're getting a lot of deposits for future work, is probably going to go down too. So all of these ratios have a tendency to interact with each other. What you see in one set of ratios should be corroborated in another set of ratios. But again, you got to look at it. You've got to make sure that all the ratios are trending in the right direction to make sure that your companies are staying financially healthy, and little subtle changes mean a lot. Thank you for joining us. Choose one thing you discovered and implement it in your business. These ideas, tactics, and strategies help you make more money, have more free time, and give back. If you like today's program, spread the word. Please review this podcast on any device you're listening to it on. Help a business owner improve the health of his company. For comments or questions, call me at 770-729-8000 or email rking@financiallyfit.business. Thanks for listening. Have a great and profitable day.